I
skills
agree.
need to be taught before. Yeah, kind of self-healing.
Oh,
Okay, sit in that chair.
I've heard about this.
All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so we know how to. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something, and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
All right, so it's up to you. You can have it now, or you can wait. Okay?
Everybody in?
I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay.
How old are these kids, Brandy?
In this video, I think the between ages of 3 and 5.
Between 3 and
Alright, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay.
It's not waiting for you.
How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need 'em.
So, like you see in the video, a lot of self-regulation has to do with being able to delay gratification and control your impulses. But in order to do this, a lot of stuff goes on. It's cognition, behavior, motivation, and the kid has to be able to do all of that stuff at the same time. Control their behavior, think about the processes that are happening beforehand, and even think like about future consequences to actions. So it can be a difficult process, especially if the kid doesn't have a lot of support for it. But self-regulation is going to be, again, dealing with controlling impulses, stopping something that you don't really want to stop, or starting something that you particularly don't want to do, delaying gratification, suppressing impulses, thinking ahead, thinking of consequences, thinking of alternatives. Maybe like, I want to do this, but I know this is not appropriate, so let me think of an alternative to that. And being able to regulate themselves and control themselves in different environments takes all of that happening at the same time. One thing that's really important, especially for classroom teachers, is self-regulation is not obedience. Self-regulation is a voluntary function that these kids do on their own, whether someone is watching them or not watching them. So you can have compliance for a kid. A kid can be compliant, And that compliance is usually related to their self-regulation, but compliance is not self-regulation. So they should be able to do these same skills when no one is watching them, when an adult is not giving them requests or demands. How you press the next slide? No, you have to go back one, I think. No, you're right. The next one. Okay, so this is what self-regulation looks like in a lot of preschool classrooms. This would be like developmentally appropriate self-regulation. So I'd like you guys to look at it and then tell me, a few of you could share maybe how you see self-regulation happening in your own classroom.
All of this is exactly what Dominic never did. Never did. He really couldn't control
And so
his
you'll see
responses.
like, the kids who struggle with developmentally appropriate self-regulation, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, there's lots of consequences later in life, and in elementary school, even like into adulthood, from not being able to self-regulate and
They
control your
grab the
emotions
toy,
and your
they-
behavior.
Chevy's on a roll, and your Metro Detroit Chevy dealers want you to enjoy the ride. Go to ChevyDetroit.com and check out our award-winning lineup of cars and trucks, plus where to find a Chevy dealer nearest you. Visit ChevyDetroit.com, then put it in deep and see why Chevy drives the Motor City.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Jackson. We all know that literacy and numeracy play a big role in a child's success at school. But what is that X factor that really makes a difference for some kids? Well, according to our next guest, it's marshmallows. Stuart Shanker is a professor of philosophy and psychology at York University, and he's going to explain exactly what that means. Hi, Stuart.
Hi.
Okay, marshmallows. What does that have to do with a child's success?
Well, around 40 years ago, an American psychologist called Walter Mischel designed this test where you say to a young child, you have a choice. You can have one marshmallow now, or if you wait 15 minutes, you can have several marshmallows. And he made a very interesting discovery. Around 30% of all 4-year-olds will wait. The kids who wait scored on average 210 points higher on their college entrance exams. They also do considerably better in terms of their social development, their resistance to risky behaviors, temptations, aggression. So it was clear that something important was starting to emerge by the age of 4. And what we wanted to know is what exactly is it, and why do some kids have this at age 4, and what do we do with the other kids?
And what have you found out to answer those questions?
We think that the key is self-regulation. And self-regulation is really a biological phenomenon. It relates to how hard a child has to work in order to deal with all the stresses in their lives. The harder a child works, the less resources they have, essentially, to learn. And self-control, which is what the Mischel test or the delay of gratification test is exploring, self-control is a learned behavior. It involves a number of skills. And what we've learned is that the better a child can self-regulate, the better a child can deal with stresses, the more they can learn these skills.
Okay, so you're saying it's a...
So self-regulation is important for a number of things. They discussed numeracy and literacy in the previous video, but we also know that without self-regulation, being able to attain that literacy and numeracy is really difficult for kids. So kindergarten teachers rank self-regulation as the #1 competency for school readiness. Over and above IQ scores, over and above math and reading ability at kindergarten entrance, self-regulation is the #1 competency. There was a research study done in 2008, and they looked at delayed gratification and were trying to determine if a child who can delay gratification or did not delay gratification, if that was an indicator of anything. And what they found is that it is a huge predictor of later academic success. and even eventual educational attainment all the way to adulthood. Like I said, there's a lot of research out right now that's saying, like, even for IQ or literacy and numeracy, that is all second to being able to self-regulate yourself in school. And the reason that they're saying that it has so much impact is because you have social emotional regulation, you have behavioral regulation. So social emotional self-regulation is going to allow a kid to conform in classroom situations, to be able to move when it's time to transition, to sit in a large group setting or a small group setting, to deal with someone one-on-one. Behavioral, and then that kind of plays into behavioral. Then you have the cognitive self-regulation, and this is where you have like a lot of problem solving, being able to think ahead, to consider the consequences of an action. And that helps to develop academic skills, but also like those problem solving life skills. Like, if I do this, what are the consequences that's gonna happen from it? You'll also see higher achievement scores. So research was done by Gary Evans and Jennifer Rosenbaum. And they reported that kindergarten children who displayed greater regulation, as reported by their teachers, scored higher on mathematics and reading assessments. Their achievement scores were higher, and they also found that their reading scores on assessments and their growth of reading ability. So from, like, let's say the end of pre-K to the end of kindergarten, those kids who were better able to self-regulate had greater gains in reading. And again, like I mentioned a little bit about the long-term effects, but the Early Childhood Research Quarterly published an article this year that reported that poor emotional self-regulation and high impulsivity in the young years have, predicted things like antisocial behavior, criminal behavior, unemployment, poor interpersonal relationships, substance abuse, even starting at middle childhood. So you see even beyond education how that ability to self-regulate and control impulses and emotions is very important. Okay, next slide. So self-regulation, it doesn't just develop. Like, a kid doesn't just come to your class and now bam, they can do all this stuff. It's a gradual process. It's going to start at birth. So infants who are startled by loud noises, they may put their thumb in their mouth to soothe themselves. Toddlers may begin to inhibit their impulsivity. If their mom asks them to go do something, they might actually comply with her. That's another way you'll see self-regulation. By age 4, children are doing more complex self-regulation. A lot of that cognitive self-regulation they're able to do at that point. So they might be able to anticipate an appropriate response, or subtle differences maybe in your facial expression or tone of voice will give them clues to how they should respond. So, but it's going to continue to grow. It grows even into adulthood. The ability to think about consequences and, should I drive really fast on this freeway, or should I do different things? Your ability to think those out and how that will impact you will continue to grow into adulthood. Now, we know as early childhood teachers that attachment is very important, especially the way that we deal with the students in our classroom. But research has come out that says maternal attachment has a huge impact on a child's later exhibition of self-regulation. So they found that when children are more attached to their moms, that they will have less production of stress hormones in challenging situations. They will employ independent, positive anger management strategies at a greater rate, and they usually are able to cope with stress better in later childhood, not kind of like in our area, but more like into upper elementary and middle school. In 2010, this research was published, and it lines up a lot with what educational theorists have been saying for a long time, that sensitive responsiveness to children increases their self-regulation. Now, we know that the study was specific to parents, but we know that our sensitive attachment and sensitive treatment of the kids will also lead to the development of self-regulation. Self-regulation it's a full body experience. Like, you have to engage your body and your mind, but a lot of it comes from brain development. So as our brains continue to develop, our self-regulation, and it's primarily triggered by the stress response system in our brain. So when you have a kid maybe who's startled by noise, that stress response system in their brain has sent off like a major alarm where for another kid, it just sends off a mild alarm. So a lot of it has to do with like their perception of things and how their brain is sending information. One way to think about it is our brain tells us that we're thirsty, and then we go on and do the appropriate action to quench the thirst. Or our brain tells us that we're hungry, and then we do the appropriate action. It's exactly like that, but there's lots of different signals that they're getting, and they have to be able to think of and act out the appropriate response to it. Looking at it from a brain science standpoint, what has been one way that they say that you can help develop this in children is to put them in mildly challenging situations and to continue those situations until they kind of desensitize to them, and then step it up a little bit and let them become desensitized to those, so that you can kind of modulate that stress response system, and what was initially sending off that major alarm will end up just sending only off a minor alarm. And then as teachers, we have to remember that there's a scope of what is developmentally appropriate in self-regulation. We should not be asking kids to stand in lines for a really long time. It's just outside of the scope of what young kids in early childhood education can even do. So we have to make sure that we have our expectations in the right place, that we're not even imposing ideas on them or requests on them that we know that they can't attain these. So, you know, kids should be given adequate time to calm themselves down. They should not be expected to calm themselves down in the same amount of time that it takes an adult to calm themselves down. We should not be having them listen to lectures. We know that their attention span for things like that is only going to be a couple of minutes. So when we are creating our classrooms or setting up programs for them, we need to make sure that what we are planning is developmentally appropriate. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So there are a lot of ways that you can promote self-regulation. Lots of research studies have been done on like interventions. I know there was one done, and I think I have it in here, on Head Start. They did like an 8-week intervention with one small group, and the other one didn't have it, and they found that those kids who had the intervention did have greater gains in self-regulation. Large group instruction is also something that I read a lot about, where maybe at your large group time, you would do a social story about how to react in a certain situation where you're explicitly teaching self-regulation. And the other that was really important was classroom climate. There was a research study done that said that you could have, let's say 2 kids came in, they have the same self-regulation abilities. The kid that has negative reactive responses from their teacher will have decreases in self-regulation over time in school. But that child who has positive, proactive self-regulation will have positive, proactive attention from that teacher will have gains in self-regulation. And so for me as a classroom teacher, that was just very something to really think about, because I can think back over this school year and say, like, I had a lot of issues with that, and I can see now, okay, so maybe this is something that I probably could have done a little bit better. So what I would like you to do now, if you could go to the next slide, is like pair up with somebody and pick 1 through 4. One person is going to make a negative reactive response to whichever one is picked, and one person is going to make a positive proactive response to whatever you guys pick.
She's your feelings. You want to look at you?
Yeah.
Aren't you?
I don't know.
Good girl.
Okay.
Which one do you want to choose?
I don't care.
4. We'll do 4.
We're going to do 4.
Proactive.
This one or the negative?
Okay, Jackie.
You want to do negative or positive?
Okay, so the child is
I probably have 2. Positive. How many teacher?
Not.
Okay. So which one do you want? Negative. Okay.
So how would you respond to that?
You can never find your solution. told you to put your scarf in your sleeve. If it's not there, I don't know where it is. So, what would you say, Puff? Is that what you make him?
Yeah, what you guys are
be done with that? Yeah.
Like a positive, proactive
So
way.
what would be?
Oh, let's look for your scarf. I'll help you find it. Maybe you put it in somebody else's scarf. Let's look. Where could it be? You sure you brought it to school today?
Okay, you guys ready? Okay, Amanda's group can go first.
Okay, we chose number 2. Child refuses to clean up because he is not done with the Legos. The negative reactive response would be to, insist that these Legos be cleaned up and you need to move on with your day, move to another area.
Try to show us here.
A positive proactive response would be to let him know, okay, you can have 3 more minutes with this activity and then you can leave it here and you can come back to it later, and not really make him clean it up, but just, okay, we have to move on, but we can leave it out and we can go back to it.
You guys ready?
Yes, we have 4. Child has a meltdown because he cannot find his scarf. A negative reactive response would be, not again. You lose that scarf every day. I told you to put it in your sleeve. Isn't it in your sleeve? Well, if you don't have your scarf, you're not going to go outside. I've told you time and time again. I don't know where your scarf is. That wouldn't be too helpful.
And then the positive would be calming the child down because of the meltdown, and then telling them, let's look for it together. Maybe it's somewhere else. We're going to find it.
You guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
We chose number 2. Child refuses to clean up Legos. A negative response would, like Amanda said, tell him to put it away. Positive would be, asking if he can save it. We can save it for tomorrow, and you can.
Or we can always
continue that plan.
come back to it.
You guys ready?
Yes, we picked number 2 as well.
Okay, number 2 is special.
Yes, and we said the same thing as them, telling them, you need to clean this up now. I told you it's time to clean up. And then positive would be, what did you make? Acknowledge what they made and how it looks like they worked on it for a long time, and they can save it, they can play with it later.
All right. So, using play to promote self-regulation. Play can promote self-regulation in a lot of ways. The pretend play, and this is very similar to the theorist Vygotsky. He talked about a lot about pretend play and their language and the zone of proximal development and how they can be stretched. So pretend play has a lot of factors that can help a child self-regulate. So pretend play, when it is very mature and intentional, helps with the development of self-regulation. And the reason is because there are rules that this child voluntarily is following. So they're going to be, an imaginary situation has been created. They are voluntarily participating in this situation. They are taking on and acting out roles, and they're following a set of rules that are determined by whatever role they have. So, for example, if I am the mommy and someone is a baby and then we have a dog, the child that has accepted this role as a dog is going to voluntarily remain in this role, delay his gratification to get up and grab something off the table, because in this role, he is a dog. And he is going to keep himself in this role in a pretend play situation. So you see, he's delaying his gratification, his impulses are controlled, and it's all voluntary. So rich pretend play is very important in developing that. You'll also see things like in the play that helps to develop self-regulation, where children are using abstract object substitutes. So they might be using a block to be a microphone. They might have sustained roles that involve different speech. So you might hear a kid on the phone talking in a different voice or changing the tone of their voice. You will have actions and interactions that are sustained over longer periods of time. And a lot of times, the scenarios will be highly integrated. They will use lots of props, lots of scenarios that literally you can't see, but they have accepted and they're allowing them to constrain them in this pretend play scenario. Now, play in modern classrooms has come under a lot of criticism because a lot of researchers have found that the type of play that Vygotsky was referring to when he was talking about the pretend play that can stretch a kid, or a lot of those factors I just talked about, they found are not present in a lot of modern day classrooms. The number one reason they're not present is because in most programs, children are not given adequate time to construct these scenarios. You know, a lot of times kids have 20 minutes of free choice, or 15 minutes in a dramatic play area. Research says that kids need between 45 minutes to 1 hour to actually enter into this rich pretend play that will allow them to create these rules, create these roles, and voluntarily comply. And a lot of, too, you also have the accountability movement, which has put a lot of pressure on early childhood teachers to fill their class time with academics relating to literacy and numeracy. So you have a lot of playtime that's cut out, so the kids are not having the same time to set up these scenarios and really develop them to essentially turn into a different person and speak in a different voice and things like this. But what they found is that a study was done in 1940 that essentially looked at self-regulation in preschoolers. What they found is that today, the ability to follow directions at all ages and in all conditions has declined from those students that they studied in 1940. And researchers have attributed this problem to a decline in both the quantity of play that children receive and the quality of play that they interact in. And this is primarily through the curriculums and structures of preschool and kindergarten programs available today. Many of them do not provide the time and support needed for kids to engage in these types of scenarios. And then you even have, so let's say you do have a program who they have free time. Teachers have to really remember that in that free time, you can really scaffold that kid and pretend play and make-believe play. You can ask them questions. You can offer them additional props to help them, stretch and extend and make that zone of proximal development higher. But what you see often in classrooms, especially I can think of a lot of kindergarten classrooms, when they have free time, the teacher is doing something else. She's not engaging those kids. So that scaffolding is a very important piece about how when that kid gets into that scenario where they have those rules and those roles, that the teacher can really push them and stretch them and give them different ideas that they may not have thought of before. So how is self-regulation even developed in play? If you had, let's say you have this awesome hour of time and you're scaffolding these kids, what is actually happening that's making self-regulation develop? The number one thing is that often in pretend play scenarios, children are delaying gratification. They are suppressing their impulsivity because they want to play. It's all voluntary. So Maria is the person being saved by the fireman, so she cannot get up and play with the new puzzle she sees because she's waiting to be saved. Children practice regulating others' behavior. They may say, hey, you can't go get that because remember, you're the police officer. So they monitor the whole situation. They learn a lot about emotions and actions in pretend play scenarios. We've all seen little girls playing with babies, and the baby is crying. What do you do when the baby cries? And how does it make you feel when the baby cries? These are all things that they're able to really explore in pretend play scenarios. They can plan and act out different emotions. These are things that are not going to be done on an everyday basis without that pretend play. And also they play in a very intentional way. Children will plan their pretend play scenarios. They will say, we need this and this and this and this. We need 4 chairs, we need a phone. They'll plan all of this, so they're thinking things through from the beginning. They're planning out what they need to do, and they're assigning roles to each other. So this is a precursor of, especially this planning, it's really a precursor of that cognitive self-regulation, being able to think ahead about a choice that you're going to make and how it's going to impact what you're doing. And in pretend play, this is being done voluntarily by these kids on their own. So I gave you guys a handout by Shannon Lockhart. It talks about executive function and play. If you guys could scan that for me, you could highlight or circle anything that you think is really special. And there's a question at the end of it. I'd like you to scan it and then answer the question. And hopefully someone wouldn't mind sharing a takeaway or the answer to their question. Anybody like to share anything?
I find this other regulation funny. Because a lot of times the kid will come up to me and say, whatever, she's taking her shoes off, and I'll look and that kid's shoes will be off. It's like, really? You're complaining about somebody doing something that you do and you have done and are doing presently. That's good. You know, they want to regulate that other person, but they're doing the same thing. That's very curious behavior. It's funny.
Did anybody think about the question at the end?
I think I'd like to work on the working memory and recall more. Get the children to remember events that they did instead of just where they played. A lot of my kids just wanted to list all the areas they played in but couldn't tell me exactly what they did. They could tell me who they played with but not what they actually did in the classroom.
Okay. practical implications. All right, so you've learned a whole lot about self-regulation, why it's important, but how does this really apply to our program? It applies to our program in a lot of ways. There is numerous research over the last numerous decades about the income achievement gap and how children who come from low-income families struggle to achieve what middle-class, students who come from middle-class families are able to achieve in grades as well as assessments. And we serve a low-income population primarily in our program. So we want to kind of consider self-regulation as a way to bridge that achievement gap. And we know now that because it's so important to educational attainment, this really may be that missing link. It may not be, let's just cram math and reading. It really may be developing those self-control skills in children. Poverty has been linked to decreased self-regulation, and one of the reasons that they found is that a lot of times families who live in low-income homes are under stress. They're trying to just figure out how to stay in their home, keep having a car, keep the utilities on. So there are reductions in the quality of the home environment. It's not always intentional, but it happens a lot because parents are not able to kind of devote the time and attention to the children that are in the home. So again, this links back for us to that attachment piece. We have an opportunity, hey, maybe the parents are under stress and they can't do that, but we have an opportunity to develop that attachment, to deal with children in a positive and proactive way. Things that research has shown can increase their chances of being able to self-regulate themselves. And then this is really huge right now, especially coming after No Child Left Behind and how it seems like assessments are just taking over American education. An increased emphasis on academics and early childhood education is a really huge reason why there is a lack of self-regulation, or a decrease rather, of self-regulation in current students between the ages of 3 and 5. One is because when you're asking kids to sit down and listen to all of this direct instruction regarding math and reading, it's requiring them to regulate more, to work harder to self-regulate themselves. Because going back to that developmentally appropriate piece, a lot of what is happening right now for these kids is not developmentally appropriate. They're having to sit down and listen to lectures and do flashcards, and so they're really just not able to do it. They're not able to do it. And because of that greater emphasis, it's less time for teachers to really do all of those things that we talked about promoting, allowing extended playtime, giving them direct instruction, reading a social story in a large group time. There's so much emphasis on school readiness and taking this test and doing this that a lot of the play and interventions and large group activities have been pushed out of the early childhood classroom. So those are really huge things for us. Now we have a great opportunity because we use high scope curriculum, which really allows us to do every single thing on the list of how you can promote self-regulation we're able to do in our classroom. So we really need to just take that advantage and use it, because children, especially when they go to kindergarten, they're not given those opportunities. So if we have the opportunity here, practically we can do it, and we should find ways, even little small ways, to help these kids develop greater self-regulation. That's all I have. Do you guys have any questions? No?